Ready to kick off the year with inspiration and motivation? If this is your year to pivot careers and make a living doing what you love, you're in the right place. In this episode, it's like you're right here with us, lettering artist Stefan Kunz and me, huddling together to share insights on career pivots, navigating uncertainty, and reflecting on the best moments of the year. Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome back to Open Studio. I'm your host, Martina Flor, and in this podcast, I share strategies and tactics to propel your career as a lettering artist or illustrator. Today, we're wrapping up the year with a special episode featuring the one and only Stefan Kunz. Stefan was the first guest on this podcast, and he's back 125 episodes later, which is crazy. If you're not familiar with Stefan, he's not just a lettering artist, but also an influencer, an animator. Stefan has successfully navigated transitions and pivots in his career multiple times. And in this episode, we are diving into the valuable insights he shares about navigating uncertainty, embracing patience in pursuing dreams, and the art of building a massive following on social media. Stay tuned for Stefan's recipe for going viral on social media, and join us as we reflect on the best things that happen in our lives this year. Without further ado, let's jump into this end of the year huddle with Stefan Kunz. Hello, Stefan. How are you doing?
Hi.
So good to see you.
It's good to see you too. It's been a while.
It's been a while. So you were one of the first ones to come onto my podcast. And first, I want to say thank you so much for that vote of trust that you gave me on that first episode. Because that was my first episode ever in the podcast, and you were in it. So, and now, like 100 something episodes later, you come back for a New Year's huddle. So I appreciate that.
It's my honor to be the first person that you asked to be on your show, and to be now 2 years later to be asked to come again. That's a huge honor.
That's awesome. So I wanted to, as I was just mentioning, I wanted to have a little bit of a end of the year huddle with you. You know, we have known one another for years now. We've had conversations outside this podcast. We have been in touch through WhatsApp. You know, like we from time to time we share like business insights or tips. And I just wanted to know a little bit about where you're at right now with your creative journey, also with your business. I know a couple of things happen in your personal life, so we're going to talk about this as well, and just have a conversation about how things have been during this year, but also how are we looking forward for next year, right? And I'm wondering right now, I know that I do this, but I wonder if this is something that you do, like kind of making a year balance. Because I know that a lot of our listeners are in that stage right now, and I wonder if you do that.
I do. So it's a loaded question. There's so many things to unpack in what you just said. So to start off, I had a crazy year in terms that I transitioned from lettering to animation. So that was kind of like this unpredicted thing that happened this year. I didn't think about it. I didn't plan on it. It wasn't in the back of my mind. It's just something that happened, and it came out of nowhere, which was absolutely insane. And I look back on this year and I just think, how was this possible? Because I showed it to a friend at lunch today, and I showed him this post that I did. It's a reel that I posted, and like the first reel that I uploaded this year, it was in January, and it said, "Start now." It was an animation, a write-on animation of "Start now," and I posted that one, and I'm like, if you're looking for a sign to get started, this is it. Do it. I'm going to learn a new skill, animation, and in like 2023, making this my priority. I didn't really think of it as much, but a couple weeks, months later, I was teaching already my first boot camp, teaching other people how to do animation, and to do that transition, of course, you can't just necessarily go from learning a new skill, teach it right away to 250 students. I have a track record of teaching people, so I've been doing this for several years now, and it's just been a perfect transition. With that came new jobs. I like this year I've done more animation projects than lettering projects, and so that switch also came in really rapidly. And I'm looking into the next year to just wanting to continue that more. Like I'm not sure if we talked about it. Like just looking at the title from our last conversation, motivation and self-sabotage. I think I remember in 2022, at the beginning of 2022, I was not sure of what the future is going to be or what it's going to look like, and I knew that lettering is not going to be the thing that I'm going to do forever. It's something that I learned and I have a huge passion for, but at the same time it's also something that just evolves, and I evolve, I as a person, creative evolve, and so I needed to find a new challenge, something that really put me out of my comfort zone, where I could learn new things. And that was this year, and I look back on especially the last 3 months, where it's been extremely hectic with a lot of client projects, with a lot of new things that I was learning, and waking up at 5 a.m. in the morning, going to work at like 5:30, being in the studio, and just focusing, drilling down on what I was working on all the different projects, and just enjoying it so much. And that's something that I haven't felt in the last 3-4 years as much. Like I have had these passion projects, but again, just looking back on that side, incredible.
That's it's interesting, because I was going to ask you that exact question later on. I saw you changing throughout the year, and I was wondering, like when I look back to your path as a creative, like I remember that you made a couple of transitions. I remember that you started with your photo typo project, right, where you were kind of combining photography with typography. Later on, you transition onto lettering and more like mural work. So I remember you creating a lot of murals at that time, and now you're going on to a new transition, which is going from lettering from lettering to animation, right?
Exactly.
And I wonder what are the things that you experience, because I work, and you know this, I work inside my academy with a lot of creatives, and many of them actually come to us because they are in the search of more creativity in their life. We work with a lot of graphic designers, illustrators, just creative people who are thinking like, hey, I want to have more creativity in my life. Maybe lettering is that thing that I'm looking for. And they start a journey where they, some of them end up like pivoting careers and just starting a completely new path, right? And I know that in this path or in this journey, there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of questioning, and there's a lot of imposter syndrome as well. So I wanted to, and I know that many of our listeners are looking up to you and saying like, oh, Stefan seems to have everything figured out, and he so seamlessly goes from lettering to animation to photography, and like there was no imposter syndrome in between, there was no questioning in between. So I wonder what were some of the things that you experienced in that transition throughout this year.
Yeah, so to get all the way back, I've done a couple of these moves. Like when I was growing up in primary school, I loved drawing. Like I was drawing all the time, and I was drawing like houses. Then at some point I was drawing like products. I was drawing like characters, and so I had these transitions in the drawing world. But then I transitioned from drawing to more doing filmmaking. So I started to get into filming, editing, to directing like music videos. That was one of my school projects that I did for like high school. And so I learned these skills. And after filming, I went into photography just because of the sheer amount of time that I've had on the side. Like I started my job as a banker, but on the side I wanted to still do something creative. So I started photography because that's the only way I was able to have an output, because otherwise with filmmaking and working full time, you realize you could only finish a project pretty much every month or every 3, 4, 5 months. And that time was like just investing so much time in one project was too much. And at some point, like photography took over. I was shooting weddings, I was doing portraits, I was doing a lot in photography. Like I won the Nikon prize, wedding prize for best wedding photographer. And it was,
I didn't know this. That's crazy.
I have the certificate, but the fun story behind that one is I was always shooting with Nikon. So all my camera gear is Nikon, it's Canon, and I won the Nikon prize for best wedding photographer, which is kind of like the odd thing. So sometimes you just need to apply and participate. I never thought I would win it, but it was funny just because I had one photo for actually a couple in Germany that I took wedding photos of. And they just paid the travel for me, the traveling part. And so I was excited to be able to travel as a photographer. In our circle of photographers, that just meant like, whoa, he's huge, he gets to travel to do photos. and the backside, you never saw that I wasn't paid for that. That's side note, that's going off on a tangent. But going back to that, so I got into the wedding photography side, photography in general. And I pushed those limits and tried to get better and better. But at some point I realized like I was doing this full time on the side as well. And I realized like I want to do something different. And so that's kind of like where I started to mix Instagram. Like what I was doing on Instagram was using an app, like doing graphic design, using fonts, and to put that on top of an image. And at some point I realized like, this is blocking me. The app only had like 10 fonts. I need to start drawing. And so I kind of like transitioned out of a necessity. I went into drawing my letters, and that's how I got into lettering without knowing that lettering was a thing, without being it a hype. And the transition into animation was something like I was waiting to transition to something new. I was waiting to do that. I would have loved to have done it at the end of 2020. That would have been the ideal moment for me to just jump into the next thing, but it didn't happen, and it took me just some longer time. And I think it's necessary for other people to hear. I love for others people to hear that, because I would have loved to hear that myself. Like sometimes the time to move on, to move into the next thing, doesn't happen right away when you want it. And so there is a time where you need to just wait it out and keep on grinding what you're doing right now. That might be a job that you're working right now. It might be like your transition into freelancing is maybe not at the point where you want it to be right now. And so wait it out. And then the transition into animation was like I started to draw out something and to work out a little animation. The first thing that I posted was like terrible. Didn't think much of it. But then I went back to someone that I saw on Instagram that inspired me, and I was like, his name is DeMatthew, and he creates these logo animations for brands that he usually doesn't work for them, but he creates these animations for these specific brands. And it's a viral concept in itself. Like the way he posts these posts and makes these reels, very viral content. And his posts have always or very often gone viral. And so I thought, why not do something very similar, but in my own style, trying to do something that I want to do. And so I got started with a shoe and with a simple concept and didn't think too much of it, but just worked it out and then filmed it similar to the way he did, posted that. And it got like a couple 100,000 views. And I'm like, whoa, all right, this is crazy. Let me do another one. The week following, I did another one, got also a couple 100,000 views. And then suddenly it hit millions of views. And I was like, this is insane. And like for the first time in a very, very long time, like in 2 years, I didn't grow on Instagram. I was kind of like plateauing, more declining than anything else. And then suddenly I see that increase, that bump. And then over the couple of months, like over this year, I saw 220,000 new followers on Instagram. I saw 150 plus thousand of new followers, or even more on YouTube, or almost 200,000 more followers on YouTube, and on TikTok also 150,000. So I grew like crazy. The whole business changed, but a lot of things didn't change. And looking back like that, it's crazy.
It's so interesting that you pay a lot of attention to that, to like the response you get on Instagram, and I wonder why that has become your metric. Where is it coming from?
It's a secondary metric. So the first metric that I have is whether or not I'm interested. Like if I am curious about learning that, and if I go on Pinterest and I see something, I'm like, whoa, how did they do that? Like the curiosity is sparked at a level that I just can't comprehend it, and I need to break it down. So that's kind of like the first metric. That is the most important one. That is my drive. It's the thing that allows me to do something. But then the second metric, it's more like an after metric. It's like, oh, actually, that went well. Can I improve that? Can I improve what I did and push that even further? And so that's kind of like where, or like even just for me to say, like, same thing with business. If you release a product that people won't buy, like the initial investment, like I had courses, for example, the 3D Masterclass is a course that I love and I love to teach, and one of my best courses that I've ever made. The response, however, wasn't that great in terms of like people didn't buy it. People who bought it loved it. They rave about it. But the thing is, it's by far not the most profitable course that I've done. Like my most profitable courses has been lettering and Procreate. And so I realized, like, of course I can push and do more 3D and stuff like that, but at some point it's like it's not viable for me as an artist, as a freelancer, as a creator, business person to push that even further. And with the animation that I saw, where like the reactions were great, people loved that, people wanted to learn how to do that, I realized like, wow, this is great. This is a great metric as a secondary. So reaction is more of a secondary metric than the first one.
It's super interesting, because I think for those that are listening, I'm trying to, in a way, translate what is the system that you use to prove something effective and, in a way, profitable, and something that you want to pursue, onto those that are listening, because you have a particularity that is that you work primarily for an audience, right? You work for that audience, you cater for that audience, and you also sell to that audience. You just mentioned that you have these online courses and these classes that you sell to your audience, right? And for you, testing something online or on Instagram, particularly where you have a big following, is a way for you to understand whether this is something they would like to buy from you, or they are interested in seeing more of and learning more, right? And I think that when I try to capture this in a concept, I think that it brings me back to one thing that I often discuss about with students and coaches of my programs, that is, you always need to find that overlap between, of course, what you love doing, which is what you just mentioned. First, you need to be interested in this. I mean, at the end, you're trying to build something that makes you happy, right? And you need to be interested in something, and at the same time, you need to, in order to make a living with it and be successful as an artist, you need to find that perfect overlap between that thing that you love doing and what people want from you. And I think you use Instagram as this tool to give you that information about, okay, this is what I like doing now, or this is what I'm testing now, and this is what I'm, how I'm expanding my creative horizons, right? Now, if people is interested in this and they want more, then I'm kind of finding the overlap, right? And this is where you can, as an artist, make a living and sustain your livelihood, right? And for those that are listening, I'm thinking like, what are the things that you can use, or the different channels that you can use to test the interest in clients or audiences, right? In your case, it's Instagram. You can also see what are the things in your portfolio that resonate more with certain clients, right? Or with a certain niche, right? But I think it's really interesting, this system that you have to just, expand your creative skills, and at the same time find that perfect overlap between what people is interested or what they want from you, right?
Yeah.
And I want to go back to something that you mentioned before. We were speaking about the fact that you have transitioned a couple of times, and And, transitioning from one thing to another, I don't know how it is for you, but I've also transitioned a couple of times in my career. And transitions are not a very comfortable place to be. And I don't know if this is something that you experience personally, but I do experience, a certain discomfort when I'm transitioning, and I feel it, I notice it, and I can identify it. And I wonder, what are the things that if you feel that discomfort, what are the things that you implement or put in place to just sit it out? In a way, you were mentioning before that whenever you want to make a change, a transition in your career, a change in your creative skills, sometimes it doesn't happen right away, right?
Yeah.
So how do you manage that transitioning phase?
The hardest part for me in the transition phase is kind of like the way you go back down to more something that isn't interesting. Like if I quickly change here in the overhead view to illustrate that, you have kind of like this curve, this beginning curve. Let's use something more dark to see that better. But it's kind of like, this is where you're at in the beginning. And as you grow, you kind of like make this huge learning curve where it goes really high up. And then you're at the peak where pretty much everything goes really, really well. And so I feel for me, that was 2018. Where I've had a lot of like projects, collaboration. I worked with Coca-Cola on New York Times Square. We did these huge projects with the airport Zurich. And then here there are other projects that went really well, like other courses that did well. But suddenly I felt after 2020 that I was kind of like at the bottom, and it didn't feel great. I didn't want to be there. And so that part is, you've experienced the high, and maybe the closest that I can translate that feeling for anybody who's listening is, if you just had a bonus week, or like you received a bonus from your employer, or you've had just one job that paid really, really well, how do you feel the next month when that doesn't come in? You have this feeling, it's like, oh man, last month was great. Like my bank account was super high, it was awesome. And I like, for people who have a store, like Black Friday is also a great example. Usually Black Friday is where you've got a lot of sales, but then Black Friday is over and you realize like, oh, it plummets down to nothing. And so that moment, to experience that, to go through that is hard. For me, it's a stretch where you're like being pulled into two directions, where you just need to hold that stretch for as long as possible. And that's how I got through this period, was just to wait it out, not to just go into my bed and just think like this is the worst thing ever. I'm never going to be able to do anything quite like this, and so on. It's all over. Like I've experienced my peak. That's not it. Like you should never do that. You should just keep on going forward. And it sounds so simple now when I look back. In the moment, I'm like, if we had that conversation a year ago, I would have been like, oh, it's long, it's frustrating, it's just like, it feels like nothing is moving. And of course, in that moment, when you're in there, you're kind of like in a storm, it doesn't feel great. And now with a year looking back, it feels like, finally, I can breathe again, I feel fresh again, and I feel like I'm at the beginning of the curve where it goes up, and that feels great. And I feel like there's so much potential in the future. What I also need to remember is, like, I used to get a lot of projects for lettering, but I forgot how long it takes from the moment where people see the type of work that you're doing until they start booking you. And so that takes time. It doesn't come from like, they saw a video, they're like, boom, that's exactly the person that I saw that I want to work with. It takes time until you start getting those jobs. And so I started in 2014 with lettering. My peak started in 2017, 18, and like 19. And so it took 3 years until I started booking those jobs that I wanted. And so with animation, I'm just telling myself, like, yes, I have a big platform. Yes, I have people following me. But at the same time, I need to wait it out. Like, I'm not a prodigy that just goes from one end and just like explodes and everybody wants to book that. Like, it will take time. And maybe like I've received the first jobs already, and I'm really excited. Like I've worked with Procreate this year, which was, funnily enough, it's one of my dream clients to work with. Like they're not the biggest company, they're not necessarily an Adobe in size, but they're, from what they stand for, from the products that I use every day, they're the number one company. And so that just felt great.
Yeah, and I think that's a good reminder also for me and for everyone listening, like this thing of like you need to work through it. Like when you experience these plateau moments or these moments of this transitioning moments, you need to work through it, like to continue doing what you're doing, right? And I think that's also, it's important to be patient, to be patient and think like, okay, this is going to happen at some point. If I continue working, this is going to happen at some point, but perhaps it's not going to happen right away. It's going to happen a couple of years from now. Now, I know that by myself that it can cause a lot of anxiety and can cause a lot of discomfort. And I personally, when I had my first transition, which was, well, my first transition was big. Like I didn't only transition careers from being a graphic designer to launching my lettering studio. I was also at the same time moving countries, like going from Argentina to Berlin. So I was having a lot of transitions at the same time. And I remember at that time, I didn't have so many tools in terms of like managing my own emotions and like my own moods. And now, over 13 years later, I feel that I'm more equipped with tools that I can use to like calm my nervous system, like, I don't know, meditation. Like right now, nowadays, I just use meditation on a daily basis, and it has really changed the way I perceive my transitions. And I also, I live life in a way. I feel that there has been also a growth in terms of, and I would love to hear what are the things that you have put in place as a creative to keep yourself healthy as well and your mind. But I feel that personally I have put a lot of things in place to just keep myself healthy as a working tool in a way, right? I always say that, as a creative, you are your main tool. Because if you're not okay, you cannot operate and you cannot create the work that you create. Yeah. And I feel that over time I have become more conscious of that. Before it was more about like putting in the hours and just working my ass off. And nowadays it's more about like finding that perfect balance between like a rest and work at my high potential and then rest again so that I can go back to work at my high potential, right? But I feel that I wish I would have discovered these tools earlier. I think that also over time we have become, or perhaps it's my perception because I'm more aware of this and I'm more looking and consuming this kind of content that has to do with wellness and well-being and taking care of yourself. But I feel that over time we have all become more conscious about how important it is to take care of ourselves, right? Yeah. I don't know how it has been for you in terms of like, how you take care of yourself, of your well-being, of your mental health.
So the thing that I'd love to say is like, I take care of myself, I work out, I eat well and all of that. And I'm like, right now, this year, on the contrast to last year, has really changed. Like last year, I worked out every single day except for 1 day a week, so 6 days a week, 1 day off, and I ate pretty healthy, not just healthy, but pretty healthy. And this year, I pretty much stopped exercising. Like I've stopped running. Like at the end of, I'm gonna blame the end of last year, but like at the end of last year, I got sick, I had influenza and really terrible. And it took me like a couple of weeks until I got better and able to go back to the gym and to work out. And I felt like I've lost so much energy and stamina that I kind of like laid it off. And then I felt like life got too hectic. I was in the process of getting married, of moving, of of doing all these different things. So the year has been packed like this as well. But all of that is not an excuse for not working out, for not doing the exercises. And I still look back, and I am thankfully gracious enough with myself to say like, hey, this is not okay, but it's at the same time, like, I'm not going to beat myself up about it. But I know that working out does my physical self does really well. And I would probably be even more able to do more things if I worked out more. But on the other hand, being in a relationship, being married now, I have this counterpart that really well reflects my mood, reflects how I'm doing. If I'm stressed, if I'm doing too much, that I can really well see it with her better than I could have seen it myself. Like even my friends like will not reflect it as much, but like I know that if I work too much, I hear about it. I notice, like, I don't need to notice because I'm in the office. I notice because I'm away from her, and she notices that too. And so these type of things is great when you're in a relationship, and where I feel like being in a relationship is, of course, hard work. Like that's another set, but at the same time, it's the best thing that has ever happened to me, and like so grateful for that because I can go home and I can relax with her. I can be there and I can just unwind. And so that has given a lot of balance. And then I've had only 2 vacations this year. Like one was a short, we got married in April. That was a civil wedding. And so we took a couple of days off then, went to Mallorca. But then for the real wedding, we went like for 12 days. We went to Mexico. And that's when we had a real honeymoon, real relaxation, all-inclusive resort. And we just got to really unwind during that time. And I realized how well or how much good it did me to be off for that time, not being on Instagram, not being on social media during this period. And also when I had just too much work, I didn't post on Instagram. Like I didn't push myself to do more than I should. And I know that a lot of people still have this notion, idea like, oh, I need to post every single day, or I need to post 3 times a week. And they have this set of rules that they tell themselves, and I've had that. And I just realized, like, if you just do really good work, sounds so simple. If you do really good work and you share that, and of course you put in play what like works virally, then it does well, even if you post it very unregularly. And so I've seen it with my posts. They do really, really well, even when I post them every 3 months, or like the last post that I did was now almost a month ago. And I'm still growing, but it's not that I'm like, right now I really don't care if I'm growing on Instagram. And that's also something that's odd. Like I'm growing as much as I've never grown before, and I really don't care. And it's not that I want to be every other person, and I, myself included, probably a couple of years ago would have said like, what a douche. This guy, like, I want to grow to 10K, and this guy like grows 200K, and he says like he doesn't care. Like that's not possible. And I tell you, like, and I had that conversation with Ian, actually, Ian Barnard. He said, like, he was probably the most excited when he hit 10K. After that, it felt like nothing changed. And you realize, like, whether or not I've had 500K or I have 800K, doesn't change my life at all. Like, I might cross the 1 million next year or in 2 years or whenever. But I realize, like, it doesn't change my life. Like, I'll still, like, when that moment hits, I'll be there on my phone. I'll be, yay. And the next moment I'll be just like, and what now? Nothing. Yeah. And so you just, either you're like, all right, I keep on going. And so it's not like you finish first in a race and then everybody celebrates you, but then like the celebration is over and you go home and you still have to sleep in your own bed. You're not living in a bigger, fancier house or whatever. And so there's not like, nothing magical happens then that didn't happen beforehand. So
but that's a little bit crazy as well, no? And I know that happens to me as well. Like I can resonate with that because in other areas of my life or my business, but you know, it does happen that sometimes you strive for something, and then when you accomplish it, it's like, okay, and then you continue on to the next thing, you know, and I'm not sure that's the greatest approach, to be honest. Like last year, something that I tried doing more, and also with my own team, is to to celebrate things and to, you know, even when a certain thing that we didn't go as planned, or a launch didn't go as planned, or I don't know, or we didn't make it to finish a certain project as we wanted to, I still push myself to just find something to celebrate about it, you know, and I feel that, because I feel that after every new thing that we do, we sit down to talk about it, but it's like, it's more, we are very detached from that thing. We are not so involved. We look at it, we look at the numbers, we look at, we debrief a certain thing or a certain action or project that we did, and we are missing on that opportunity of saying like, hey, still, that was really cool. We made everything we could possibly do, and we really pour ourselves into it, and we were working really good as a team. We were giving our best. So I feel that personally, I try to strive for this approach, although I know what you're just saying, that it doesn't always happen, that you have to really push yourself to appreciate those moments, you know, to when you, in your case, when you hit 1 million subscribers, that you will say like, hey, that is amazing. I'm going to just take, I don't know, 3 weeks off or whatever, you know, because that's a big accomplishment for me. But yeah, I think it's, we need to remind ourselves about the things that we accomplish as well.
Yeah. I love that. My wife actually, she celebrates more than I do. And so whenever I hit like a milestone, like this year was 600 and 700, and every time she was like, yeah, let's celebrate, that's awesome. And I'm like, oh, yeah, no, calm down, it's all right. Like, I'm not the euphoric person that she is, but she does a great job, and that helps. And I totally understand what you say.
Is she working with you, or I think she works with you, right?
She's helped me a lot with murals, with simple projects like that. Like she's studying full time, but or part time, but still helps me sometimes in my business.
Ah, that's cool, because I thought I saw you in a couple of pictures with someone, and I thought like, well, maybe that is the same person that is showing up in the like wedding pictures and stuff. So yeah that's great. And you know, I have a few things that came up from what you just mentioned. You opened so many windows in the things you were talking about earlier. So you mentioned, you know, this thing about Instagram and how crazy it is sometimes that that by not paying attention to something, it can even lead to success, which I'm not sure I support that approach. I think, you know, I'd rather go in the opposite approach, like to work consistently onto something to make it happen. But I mean, it also happens that something that you don't pay attention to suddenly is very successful. And you mentioned before, which got me hooked, which is like, okay, you know, when I go and post on Instagram, I try to you mentioned something like, I try to post something that works or know that it will go viral. So what are the tips that you can give us? Give us the tips.
This is just going back quickly on your point of consistency. Consistency is great and you need it. I absolutely go for that. Like, you need to have consistency to just keep on going. But consistency alone will not bring you anywhere. That will just tell you to do the same thing over and over again. But consistency with a step of improvement will get you further. Like, otherwise you're just like on a treadmill just doing that. But if you go up the stairs, then that's kind of like when you see the growth. And so sometimes, instead of just being in your tracks of doing the same thing all the time, like, I know that a lot of creators, they have kind of like their posting schedule of, I post this, this, and this. And I see this even in agency, and that gets me so frustrated when I see smaller agency who do that for brands. They sell them like packages, social media packages, like I'll post like 3-4 times a week for you, and we'll do like the whole content thing, or like they even promote their work by saying like I get 17 pieces of content done in like 2 hours. And I'm like, great, they're all going to suck because they don't deliver value. They don't get anyone interested. And like, you're not doing anything. Like, you're just doing content and filling up the feed for no one. And so,
and also like you need, what I always say that, what I always say is that you want to do something based on something that worked, right? You want to do something based on some information that you got from doing another thing, right? And I always, something that changed the way I see social media is when I started working with a social media manager, Ali. She used to give us a monthly report of the things that worked out, and for me it was like, oh, okay, that that gives you complete feedback on what are the things that, as I said before, as we were mentioning before, what is the overlap between what you want to deliver and what you want to do and what the people want, and and you can find that in your Instagram feed. You can see clearly what are the posts that work best and do more of that, right? And you can apply that concept onto a lot of other things, right? Onto your life, your business, whatever. So this is a little bit like the approach that you strive for, right? When you think about like going viral, is this something that you have into account, like the things that worked, and do more of that? Yeah.
So it's always to understand, like, there are formulas that work really well. Once you've understood a formula that works well, and you can see that if it gets views over and over again. If you have
what are those formulas? What are those formulas?
So there are different formulas. Like one creator that I've gotten to know, and he has 60 million followers on TikTok, but he's created a format that I haven't seen many other doing, but and he didn't understand why it's working. But it's a guy, he has two black what do you call those, gloves on his hand, and he cooks. And so he uses the iPad, the back of the iPad, as a cutting board, and starts cutting on those on the back of the iPad. So he cuts through a chicken breast, and then kind of like puts on like the coating, and then fries it, and then just bites into it, and so on. And so there's so many elements. Like, he has a visual hook right at the beginning because he has a knife and the back of an iPad, two things that definitely don't mix together. Plus, he has usually something that he slaps on the back of the iPad and then starts cutting right away. So the hook, the thumbnail of that is brilliant. Now, for me, and I've like I've shared, like, I've taken that from the Matthew, and I've kind of like, if I show you the here the screen, so you have kind of like the different like videos that I have, and here, for example, the Rolex one, you have Rolex, Pringles, a Mercedes car, and you can see kind of like the Rolex, you recognize Rolex right away, but you see that the Rolex logo is not done right. And so right away, you have kind of like this fury in you that says, like, this is not right. As a graphic designer especially, you're like, this is terrible, but you also have a connection to Rolex. Everybody knows what Rolex is. And the funniest thing comes actually in the comments when you go and click inside. There's one guy who posted in the comments like, great, but the theme of Rolex is something strict and luxurious. So maybe this style doesn't fit it well, in my opinion. And then has like 8,000 likes, 44 replies. So people feel the same way as he does. Some people don't. So that's why it creates this controversy, and why people start bashing it out. That creates engagement and people being interested in the whole thing. And you see that with all these elements. Like, that's why I use also bigger brands to animate, just to get into this thing fast. Like, I get to connect with you really quickly with just the first shot, because the first thing you see is this logo or this product that you know, and you're like, oh, I know this. What is he going to do with that? And I try to give you and that's what I teach in my last session of the bootcamp, of the animation bootcamp, is in the last part is going through the different things. Like, first you have the hook, then you have kind of like a payoff that just gives you a sort of incentive to watch the rest of the video. So I'll show you that the steps that I'm doing right now, I'm not doing something random, but within 1 second, I'll show you exactly what you're going to see at the end, and I'll play that back, just that short minute that or second that you've seen, like me transforming something, that gets to be animated, and you're like, oh, this is an animation. This guy's doing an animation. So your brain already has given you a little reward because, one, you figured it out. You're like, whoa, I got it. This guy's doing an animation. And of course, that doesn't happen the way I explained it. Like, you're not going to react like this. But that happens inside of you in your brain. And your brain is like, ooh, that's cool. I want to see what else he's doing. And that moment on, I'm going to redo that a couple of times just to build up the anticipation of you getting the full payoff, the full animation. And in that full animation, that's the full payoff, I'm going to show you a couple of things that you didn't see before, which again gives you more. And also because it's so short, you hopefully will go back and want to rewatch the entire thing back again to get to that point to see kind of like something you might have missed. And so that is kind of like a very simplified way of doing this. But then you see, like, if you go back to my Instagram page, if I show you this, you see like, oh, these are all black backgrounds. And then back here you see, oh, there's a white background, there's a blue background, there's a yellow background, another blue. People don't realize that I actually test a lot of things out. I test the duration of the videos, I test the background of the videos, and I've seen like having a different color might get kind of like this stop because you're kind of like out of your tracks, but, and that's a bigger problem, your attention is not on the iPad right away, it's on the background. And so to get your view directly on the element that you need to see, that's kind of the harder thing. Plus, also what is also important is like the first post that I mentioned was this one here, the start now. Yeah. And you can see like this one has 100,000 views, sounds great, but compare that to 1.5 million, 3.8 million, 3.3, all that, there's a huge difference. And that's because just showing your work as it is created is not as interesting. You don't understand like what is this? What is the point of this? Yeah. Like you don't know that it's animated by hand, it's been worked on and so on. And so even if you saw my animation as is, I definitely will say as standalone, they would not perform as well as with the whole idea of creating this whole viral hook, this thing that gets built up and then being shared. It's the same thing with lettering, where you share your post more on a mural, like on a mock-up, rather than having it just the final version that you've just created, just uploaded on a white background. Never going to perform the same way.
Hey, I've got some major plans in the works to help you not only master hand lettering, but also create a fulfilling career in lettering design. Get ready because next year I'll be supercharging my signature program, the Lettering Seminar, and I'm pretty sure it's going to establish itself as the #1 program in the world for aspiring lettering artists who dream of building a career they truly love. If this resonates with you, head over to martinaflor.com/lettering tips and sign up for my newsletter to stay in the loop. Keep in mind that I only open registrations once a year, so start wrapping your head around it now, making sure you're ready to dive in as soon as the doors swing open. So again, martinaflor.com/lettering tips and sign up for my newsletter to stay in the loop. All right, let's get back to the show. Absolutely. I speak, well, so many notes that I have taken, and I'm going to go review some of the steps that you have shared. But of course, seeing the working context connects with people in a different way. And this applies not only to your Instagram feed, but also to your portfolio. Like we worked a lot inside the academy. We work a lot with artists and designers that build an online portfolio, and it's oftentimes, or one of the mistakes I see most happening is that they are like a showcase of nice pictures and beautiful artwork, but it's hard to understand whether this was a logotype or it was a book cover or it was what was it, right? And this is the thing that really connects with an editor who is looking for someone to create a book cover, or a brand who is looking for someone to revamp their branding and logotype design, right? So I wanted to go back to what you just mentioned. You mentioned like step number one is to have a visual hook to what you do, right? To have that first thing that drives people attention in. Yeah. for you that thing is this weird aspect or this standout aspect of your first or your key image, right? Something is not quite right. Something is not as expected, and people are hooked in to try to fix it in a way, right?
Yeah. So here you can see this a lot better. It's like this. Yeah. First thing here is a transformation of the product, and as a designer, you automatically like that's not how you like rescale anything, but that's kind of like the idea. It's like, oh, and I kind of do a quick product reveal, and then here in the next couple of scenes, you see kind of like I'm moving the object, and I'm not showing everything, but I'm moving it pretty quickly, and then we're not past 1 second, and I already play this back, and then go back and then zoom into the next part, and so within 2 seconds. The most important thing is like the hook is like the moment when you scroll down, you need to stop. You need to be able to be like, whoa, this is something I need to finish watching, because your brain will tell you within 2 or 3 seconds whether you want to keep on swiping or stay there and watch the rest. And so you need to give someone that visual stimulation. The hook is pretty much the YouTube thumbnail or the book cover of your book. Like if that is not exciting enough, you're not going to watch the rest of it. And so to make that really great, you need to have people look and stare at the right elements at the right time. And so that is kind of like what magicians are so great at, is kind of like sleight of hand. They know exactly where to divert your attention and be looking at the right elements. And so when we take this approach to cooking, for example, is I'm not going to start by standing in the frame and start talking about like, hey, this is how you do your Christmas feast. Because one, nobody has a connection with you. Like unless you're a very known person like Gordon Ramsay that people know about, they're not going to stop swiping or stop scrolling because of you. So the next thing is, all right, how can I do something that will get the attention? This is why like a lot of people, and if you try to just look at the very first second of the things that you actually stop and look through the end, usually there's a slap, there's a zoom in, there's something that just like grabs your attention because it kind of like pulls you into something. And so there's so many different ways of doing that. Got to try that out. And then with the recipe, it's finding out the right recipe for you. There's different recipes for different elements. Like for example, for cooking, there are different ways of showing how to cook a recipe. There are things that you can take. There's also things that you can experiment with. But like having your finished plate like slide it in at the beginning, having a beautiful shot where it just like slides in, and then just like, whoa, okay, and well presented. Like not just having a McDonald's meal just like open up and just everything falling out and not looking great. That's not something you want. But that's kind of like the hook and the attention grabbing element that you want to do, which I feel like a lot of people forget. Like if before you work anything else in your content, work on the hook. Like the hook is going to decide whether or not people are going to keep on watching or not. And then once you get people to watch, then you need to start working on how you present your piece and how to keep them watching till the end. But that's another thing. If you cannot grab people's attention, you'll never know if people will watch till the end.
For sure, that's a good point. So you have the hook, which is these 2 or 3 seconds where people stop in their trails and engage. Then you mentioned the reward, where you give them a win, so that at some point your viewer or your follower says like, "Hey, wow, that was amazing," right? And you also mentioned the engagement, this weird factor. You mentioned this. I think in a way you mean contrast, which is like showing a Rolex, the branding of Rolex, using a very crafty animation style, right?
Yep.
Where you can create this engagement by people getting opinionated about it, right?
Yep.
So
this is called more controversy than contrast.
Okay, controversy.
Controversy creates a huge dilemma within people. The most important thing when you're using controversy is to use it in a way that you're okay with. Like, because I've done it. I did one post with lettering where I posted a picture of Greta Thunberg, the activist. And so she always does these cardboard signs and then she holds those up. And I was like, you know what, as a lettering artist, it frustrates me to have these signs being written out in a terrible way. Let me redesign that. And so I created this mock-up where I just like erased what she wrote and rewrote that in a beautiful way. But I rewrote her same message. And that one was already a mistake because I had no connection to her messaging. I was not for her nor against her. I had no opinion towards her. But that didn't stop that everyone who saw the post was like super opposed and super like pro or con. And that created a huge conflict that I was in the middle of. And I started losing followers. Like I think I lost about 1,000 followers per minute just from that one post. And so I was like, whoops, I need to take that off real quickly. Like it got a lot of engagement, but it also lost like so much like, and like people didn't like the idea. Like, oh, her lettering is actually better. Like it fits more her message. Then there were people that were like, why are you posting something from her? Like this is terrible. Like I'm leaving. And then there were other people who love this. Like, oh, this is funny, great. But you see that it was pulling in all different directions. None of the directions that I actually wanted. And so I realized like, that was a bad idea, and I shouldn't have done it. So I should have used more of a general theme. And so that's kind of like where you learn that controversy is not great. In this case, with the Rolex video, I realized, hey, I'm totally fine with this. Like the first time I posted the video, it got 17 million views. The second time, it's already at 7 million views. And I'm like, hey, you know what? I actually really don't care if you think this is not perfect for Rolex. Like I've done the same thing for Mercedes. Other people thought like, oh, this doesn't work. This fits more Opel or Ford or something else, but not Mercedes. Like they're classic. And so you realize that some people have a brand image of the brand that they want to uphold because they feel so strong and they identify almost with that. And I realized like, oh, I don't actually have a problem. Like even better, you're just creating content for me or engagement for me. And so sometimes I like to go into those comments and I'm like towards that comment that I've read before, I just replied with, why not? And then suddenly that person is coming back and going back on the post and is like trying to explain, taking time to really write out a thoughtful response. Great, because as he's typing in, he's still watching in the background. You see the video is playing. And so Instagram thinks like, oh, this has got to be good. Like if he's coming back to rewatch this so often and to reply, like this is great. Like that's bringing people together, and that's why it's getting so many more views. And so you could think like, oh, next time I'm using more luxury items just to prove my point.
To irritate people. So I was wondering, like you were mentioning with this Greta's post that you created, and you noticed that there was a lot of controversy around it. I wonder, how did you deal with that situation? Because I can imagine you behind the phone, like really stressed out and feeling a lot of anxiety, or were you not feeling anything in relation to this? I can imagine that personally, I have had a few situations where there was some controversy and I was getting some comments, and they created shitloads of anxiety. So I wonder, how do you deal with that? Because you being more exposed on social media and having that many followers on social media, you must be faced with these kind of situations more often than a normal person, let's say.
So it really depends on what it is about. Like if it's something that's personal to me that I feel strong about, then of course that's going to do something. If I like a great example was Black Lives Matter. That's something where if you're not posting about it, people will comment. If you're posting about it, you're doing it wrong. Whatever you do, it's the wrong thing. So that's kind of like a little bit more problematic. The post that I did about Greta Thunberg, that didn't cause me anything. I was like more like I was shocked of what happened, kind of like the outcome of it, and didn't expect that. But at the same time, that's kind of like the hypothesis that I created in my brain beforehand. And I'm like, that didn't play out the way I thought it would. Yeah. I got to learn that. And that's when I readjust. And so that's kind of like, okay. And that didn't create anxiety. It was just like the time that it took me to react to that and to be able to like, oh, you know what? It's not worth it for me. I'm just going to take it down. Like, I'm not going to stand my position just for something that I don't even believe in. But when it is something that I believe in or that I feel strongly about, then a backlash can definitely create more anxiety and so on. And so, for example, for my faith, I will always stand strong, and I'm like, I don't care what people will say, how people will hate, pull their hate towards me and just feel different. Like, that's like, I've posted Bible verses before, and like people have strong opinions about the Bible and faith and so on. And so I'm like, well, I'm not telling you to believe. Like, I'm sharing a quote from the Bible that I feel strong about, that is encouraging for me, and I hope it's going to be encouraging for you. And I'm not trying to preach. I'm trying to just share something positive. And so, like, be strong and courageous. That's a quote from the Bible. It's like, why am I sharing this? Because it encourages me primarily, and as a lettering artist, it used to be like lettering, that those quotes specifically were speaking very strongly to me, and I'm like, this is so encouraging. I want to share that. Yes, it is in the Bible. You don't have to accept it. You can just look past it. But if you don't like it, just scroll through or unfollow me. I don't care. And so that's kind of like where I can turn it off. But I understand, like, during these other elements, like these things that happen where there's often a demand on influencers to side on a specific topic. That's kind of like where I draw the line, where I'm like, I need to make sure, like, I cannot win either way. And so like, inaction is not great. Action is then looked at wrong, and like, you're a white person, you shouldn't be talking about this topic. And so I don't want to get into the topic, but this is kind of like where I feel like, oh, like, I want to watch out, and I want to do it carefully. I don't want to do just something because I feel pressure to do it, and at the same time, and I feel like there is an issue that needs to be addressed. Like, I don't want to take away from that, like, just think about myself. That's not the point. But how you do it and how you deal about it, that's something we need to address, and we don't need to do everything public. That's also something very important.
Yeah, I've had a couple of situations where people have reached out to me because I wasn't speaking about a certain topic, right? And I can totally relate. Sometimes it's very hard to make an opinion on something you don't know much about. You know that it exists, you know that it happens, you know that it's not fair, and perhaps you even agree or disagree with it. But it's just hard to make a statement in a way that makes everyone happy, or also that in a way that people, or you get your message across, right? And I think that personally, I have approached, when I was approached by some people because they were questioning why I wasn't speaking about certain topic, I had to be really, in the very beginning, I was a little bit like reacting to it, like, hey, because I have a lot of following, I don't necessarily need to speak about every topic. But at the same time, then when I could stop and think about it, I thought, like, well, I mean, I can imagine that someone that is suffering a certain situation may feel like the rest of the world is going along and like continuing their life, and you are stuck with that horrible situation, call that war or I don't know, unfairness in a different way. So I have to remind myself to be empathetic about how other people perceive their own reality, and also how they see us continuing with our lives when they're, totally overwhelmed by their own context, right? But yeah, it's really hard to deal with that when you have a big online presence, right? And also it's very hard, I feel, to deal with the voices against some statement or something you believe in, like you just said, like when you post something about the Bible, you have people telling you something, like being for you and agreeing with you, and people that are complaining about the fact that you preach for a certain religion, and you have to also be true to yourself, and there will be people who will like you and would like the way you think. There will be people who won't like you. And I think the people who like you and agree with you and align with you, then perhaps this is the people you really want to work with and stick around, right?
Yeah.
And just accept the fact that not everyone will like what you do. Also, as an artist, not everyone will like what you do. Not every brand or client or audience will resonate with what you do, right? And that's totally fine, because there will be people who really do, right? And this is the people you want to focus on. So just switching gears to a different topic, I was wondering if you plan for the year ahead. Do you do your yearly planning, or you just go with the flow? How is it for you?
I usually have a rough idea of what the next year, like what I want to do, or how, especially with courses and things like that, what I kind of want to pursue, what I don't want to pursue. Like client work, I can plan, but just what is coming in. And so that's kind of like more of a short-term plan. It's not something else. But funnily enough, the next year, I want to do something crazy, in my opinion. It's not something that I want to do, but I feel like it's the time. And so going back to the Bible, in the Bible there's a command that says, like, you should plow the field for 6 years. You should plant seeds and plow the field for 6 years, but the 7th year you should let it rest. And so it's not like a sabbatical where you don't work at all, but it is actually just a year where you let the ground rest and let that grow again. And it is agriculturally, there's actually a thing that the ground needs to just be left empty for a year to actually be more fruitful in the years to come. And so what I've taken from that is I want to stop. I've stopped all ads on my accounts. I will stop promoting any courses. I will not publish or put out a new course or advertise a new course or even existing courses. And so for next year, I will put that to rest. And what I want to do is actually I'm not exactly sure exactly how it's going to look, but the idea right now as it stands is I want to invest back into the community that I started building, and I want to put back into it, because kind of like looking back over the last post that I've done this year, all of them were aimed towards like, hey, do you want to learn animation? And then I've had like a perfect flow, like really, I feel like I've optimized it as much as I possibly could in this year. But just like from the moment where you're like, if you saw a post, an animation post that you were interested in, you could just type in the word animate. And then I had a chat flow that would come out and appear right away with like, oh, you're interested, great. Like here is a list, or here you can sign up for the wait list if you're interested. And if you like, kind of like bring you all the way through. And then when it was time for a new course to come out, then you would get the information. I had an email flow. I've had like all the setup just to build that up. And I feel like I've optimized it so well that at some point I'm just like, hey, you know what? This is just so transactional, and there's so much missing in that, so much human, that I just want to step back and for next year really want to let that go. And that means cutting off my biggest income source, like courses and products are about 2/3 of what I make a year. And so it is frustrating on one hand to think about like, oh, I'm just cutting away that, like that alone, I could live from that alone. But I want to invest in my own skills. I want to invest in other people. I want to share more content for free and just teach people for free, like give that away on Instagram, without the goal, like you could see it as a way like, hey, maybe that's a better way to sell your courses because people then are interested in all that. Like that's not the approach that I wanted to take. Like, trust me, I know kind of like both sides, and my approach is really like, it is harder to step away from that, to let that go. And it feels also scary for me as a business person to say like, I'm doing this, but thankfully I feel like I've had a couple of good years in the past that I've saved enough to know that, hey, I can do this without it. And maybe it will open up a new door. Maybe it will do something completely different that I didn't expect, but it also will probably carve out more time that I know what to do with. And and I don't know exactly what the outcome of this will be, but it's going to be interesting. And so I will probably start pitching again more next year. I'll probably do other couple of things more next year, and I want to do more client work. So I want to get into that more. But at the same time, I always like to do something on the side. And so I don't know exactly what this is going to be.
That's so interesting. Like I can totally resonate with that, because I feel that sometimes the less or the counterintuitive decisions are the ones that work the best. And I feel that, I've gone through the same process in the past years of building and automizing a lot of systems and processes inside my business. And so a lot of the things that we sell and that we offer our students, many of them run in the back end or run on their own. And this year, I do plan for the year ahead. I'm kind of a nerd in every possible aspect. So I have my checklist, I have my systems to plan for the year ahead. And by the way, you can download my checklist for planning for a kick-ass year on martinaflor.com/plan. This is actually the one that I use to plan for a kick-ass year. And this year I said to my team, hey, you know what? I want to, for instance, there's one of our programs, which is our signature program. It's called the Lettering Seminar. And it's the program where we see more people coming into our world, and it also runs in a lot of different ways. So it works on an evergreen funnel, let's say. So people can sign up throughout the year, and we also do a couple of launches throughout the year. And this year I said, no, we're gonna close the program. We're gonna open it just once, and it's gonna be the best program in the world, so that when we launch it, when we do it once, it's gonna be amazing for us, for our students, and I know that my team said but really, are we gonna do that? It's kind of like the biggest chunk of our income as a company, and I feel that sometimes you have to do this very bold moves in order to see some change, and also some change in the energy in which you run your business, right? I feel that oftentimes when you automatize a lot of things, when you systematize a lot of things, of course you gain a lot of time back, and I really preach for systematizing and automatizing things in your business, even if you're a solopreneur or freelancer. But sometimes it does take this excitement out of the thing, right? Because you're no longer involved in making that happen. You're more like, someone else is doing that for you. So I can totally relate to that approach. So you're gonna really close a lot of the things that you're doing in your business. That's very interesting. I'm looking forward to see how that comes up for you. And I'm surely gonna invite you next year to the podcast to see how this experiment worked out for you.
I'm excited to see that too. So I'm not gonna close the courses. People can still buy the courses, and I'll still try to make them as awesome as possible. But I'm just not gonna be talking about them. You'll find the links online, but I've even turned off the email sequences. So if you want to try out my course, you don't have to sign up for an email anymore. You can just click, and you'll be directed right away to the free parts. And so that's kind of I'm removing the entry barrier to everything and just make it friction, frictionless. Yeah,
that's awesome. So I would love to do something with you. Last weekend, I had a couple of friends over, and we did a round of telling about the three good things that happened this year. And I would love to do that with you. Would you like to start? You just have to tell us if 3 good things that happened this year. That were the highlights for you.
Highlight number 1, getting married in Italy.
Yeah.
That probably nothing's going to come close to that.
Yeah.
So your turn.
Oh, so I turned into a company, actually. I always operated as a freelancer. And as my team continues to grow and we are more people than just myself, I started feeling that I needed to create a bigger container for everybody to feel that they were working for something that is bigger than myself. Because oftentimes I felt that because my name was on everything, and my name continues to be part of our branding and part of like the way we market ourselves to the world. But I felt like, hey, we need to create something that is bigger. And even if we are using my name as a tool to market ourselves, the container is bigger than just Martina. So that was a big step for me. Also, as I started here as an expat coming to Berlin, not even speaking the language, opening my lettering studio out of nothing, and being able to, like, over 13 years later, to have a German company that hopefully I can also then later pass on to my kids. That these are the expectations that are in my mind. Not that I want them to necessarily pursue the world of lettering. If they want, then great. But it just makes me feel like I rock, like I created this big that is bigger than myself. That's and awesome. I can pass it on to later generations. So yeah.
This is so sad that we only get to this conversation right now, because now it's getting interesting, where I feel like this is probably one of the questions whenever someone talks to me about, like, hey, I'm beginning of my career, I'm starting out. I always tell them, think about these two things: personal brand or a company. And these are the two things I wish somebody told me, because whatever you build on your personal brand, it's going to be hard to make this into a company. It is possible. I've seen it being done, and I'm very curious to hear about like how you are expanding that. But I've encountered the same problem as you did, where at some point it's like, can you give other people work to do, and like how do you grow that? And depending on how you built it, is that even possible? So we're running out of time, where I wish we could have that conversation next week and keep on going.
We are gonna have it next year, so let's put that on our yearly plan. So you Definitely. Go with the second right. Good thing that happened this year.
A second good thing that happened this year, I would say it's learning animation and teaching it at the same time. It's really it's so much fun. It's so like creatively demanding, and especially because I had to stop thinking about in, like, you usually see things in a still frame, but now I suddenly have to really push my thinking into motion to see things moving and kind of like developing like this. And so that requires now another processing power that I hadn't or didn't have as much. And so it's fun to push myself further, to try out things, and especially to expand my horizon creatively. Like, I'm getting in touch with film directors, with people in different spheres that I've never had before, and like opening up conversation with people. Like I had these conversations with lettering artists, so like with so many people out of the lettering artist community, like that alone was really great. But now it's opening up to a whole new set of creatives, which are also all in their own rights, like so interesting, so captivating, so like I can learn so much from them. And I feel like a beginner at the same time as I'm also teaching, which is very weird, but being able to do both of these same things at the same time, trying to learn, like get everything like a sponge, like really absorb everything that you can, and then also just give it away right away, and to teach whatever I can. But I've always learned that teaching other people also pushes myself, because like I see now other people doing the same thing that I do. They get also thousands of views on their videos, and I'm like, whoa, like if they keep on going like this, they'll catch up. And so that is also a way to push myself, because otherwise I feel like, I could just keep on doing this and that's okay. But like teaching other people always pushes my own limit.
Oh, that's so good. Yes, just as a side note, one of the highlights of my year are when I run these focus groups with my students, and normally we run these focus groups also to understand how we can improve some things, some of the things that we do, but also perhaps we record an alumni huddle, and then we show this alumni roundtable to potential students that want to join our coaching program, for instance. And this is such a beautiful moment because I see them like rocking and I see them like super empowered, and I feel like, oh my God, I was a tiny part of that transformation, like I saw them like coming into one of the programs, they kind of shy and low in self-confidence, and then see them out in the world, like kind of rocking it. That's so good. And in your case, it's like seeing them getting thousands of views on a video that you taught them how to do it. That's such a great reward about teaching. So yeah, that's great. So my second good thing that happened this year is a tough one. I survived the car accident, actually.
Wow.
Yeah, I had a, and this is the first time that I'm telling this publicly, but I had around June, I was involved in a very hard car accident. Actually, a car just crossed lanes and came straight at me. I was luckily alone, and I could step out of the car on my own. I had just a broken arm. But yeah, I mean, that was such a crazy experience to have. And also a lot of, you have a lot of mixed feelings after that. Of course, the shock of an accident, but also you gain a lot of appreciation. And that brings me back to some of the things we were speaking about before, about how important it is to appreciate things. And I think that these situations really confront you with what you really have. And I remember that at that time I was so appreciative of, like, it's so good to have my husband next to me, and it's so good to have my team that supports me throughout this situation. And it just gave me a lot of aha moments in terms of like, and it's so good to, being able to wake up and having to go back to work because, life continues, and do it for something that I really believe in, because I couldn't imagine doing that and going back to a job that I hate and that I despise. So that, a situation that was on paper really negative, it just gave me a lot of like learnings, So good for me for surviving that car accident. Now back to you. What is your third good thing that happened?
Hey, this is huge. Surviving car crash like that, like while I still had my learning permit for driving, I got into a crash, and it was a minor crash. Like I just bumped another car on the highway, but that felt crazy. And so, like in a collision thing, I don't even want to know how that feels like. So that's crazy.
Yeah,
I'm glad you survived,
of course,
and you're still here.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, and it's crazy because that same week I was opening registrations for my coaching program, which happens only once a year, and I just stood up. I put myself together, and I run the webinar that opens registrations. And I have to say that I killed it. It was one of the best webinars I ever taught. And
wow.
And this is what I mean with, like, I was so grateful of like having to carry on with a life that I really love, because otherwise I don't know how I would have done it, And that was, one of these negative events that have a lot of positive aha moments for you. Of course, then I understand the seriousness of a car crash, and I immediately look for help, for someone to help me process the incident and everything. Like, I'm not trying to like just put it aside and say that everything is okay, but it's still like, I had a lot of like aha moments from that one incident. Wow. So back to you. What is your third good thing that happened this year?
So now I think I will have to pack a couple of things in that third thing. One is just successful year. I think every year where you can finish with a positive, like making profits with your company beyond just paying your salary, like that's a huge win. And for me, that's always like something that I'm extremely thankful for. Moving in, like part of getting married is of course moving in with your loved one and with your wife, and so creating that home, we're so lucky with the home that we have. That's such a nice place, and I love getting back there. And but the one thing also that I want to put into that third category is it's a special thing because it's weird for me that I would consider that as a special moment or like something I'm very thankful for. But I talked about the time after I got back from my honeymoon. I had a break and I just looked at the last 3 months of the year, and I looked at, all right, what do I want to put into that time? And so I create like these lists of options. Like I've had client work, I had 2 huge projects, a third one that came in, and then learning a brand new app, Procreate Dreams, then launching another boot camp, but then also promoting that boot camp, and finally like adding on top of that all these elements, and finally just like to promote it, trying out something new with a challenge. And so I put all of that into that basket as like either that or like the easier way without the stress, like just doing my client work, couple of projects, and that is already enough. And I decided to go with the full thing, and I realized like it's going to take a lot of work to get that. And so I had like 2 weeks where I was working super hard, where without actually setting an alarm clock, I woke up at 5 a.m., was in the office at 5:30.
Wow.
And these days, like some friends I had were worried that like, you're working too much. My wife also said like, hey, you're waking up so early because you're stressed, and that's kind of like a normal reaction to that. And I'm like, no, I'm actually so excited to go back to work. And so that's what I'm so thankful for, is having this energy, this excitement to go back to work, to be not like you said, kind of like, oh, this frustrated, this job that you hate, but having this joy again. And I told my friends that this is something very special. I haven't had this in a very long time, and I feel so alive, and I feel so excited to go back to work. And
that's so good.
And that's, for me, it's so great. So looking back at a positive year, a year that was filled with something brand new, and still being able to teach something brand new. Like I hit the record of how much revenue we made with the courses this year. And so again, like that also just like, whoa, like even better than the years before. Like every year just been growing on Teachable, and it's been great on that end, but that's not all that it's all about. And so I'm very thankful for a crazy 2023. And the craziest thing was, at the beginning of 2023, I didn't see animation coming. I didn't expect that. I was drawing a blank of what could I teach in that year, and just to see that unfolded is something I'm extremely thankful for. And it's not just luck that I would say that something came along. Like I feel there's something bigger in there, but yeah, really, really thankful.
That's so good. Like you were surprised by a year unfolding in a totally unexpected way.
Yeah.
That's so good.
So what is your third point?
Lastly, I would like to mention my 5-year-old. He changed kindergarten this year.
Yeah.
And I was super, I was a little bit nervous about this because he's 5 years old. And I thought like, well, he had already his group of friends and everything. And he switched to another, kindergarten. And the reason why we changed him is that the previous kindergarten he was in was really dysfunctional. Like they were, they were closing often. They didn't have enough teachers, and like there were a lot of things that were not working right. And when at some point we said like, hey, we hold it for a long time, like for 1 or 2 years, even though the kindergarten was really far from the place where we live right now. And then we said like, hey, let's try it out. Let's try to find a new place. And as we found this new place, and this was also a huge learning for me this year, is like it was from like really day and night. We realized like it is crazy how much things can change also for your kid when you change something that you believe is not completely right, because oftentimes we see things that are not quite working, but we let them sit, and then you gain, like, you collect all this negative energy around it. You're not completely happy about it. You don't completely hate it, but it's like this middle point that is like, I'm not sure. And I think that oftentimes making that change or taking that plunge, it leads to something positive. And, behind that, making that step, you have a completely new world. And for us, it was this new experience for our kid, but also for us as parents. We were not hustling anymore with picking up the kid or keeping him at home, during crazy working times and stuff. So that was a big change that we did, and also that was a successful one. So
wow.
So that was a great year, I think, for both of us. I am so happy that we got to hang out at the end of 2023. Yeah. I would love to have a conversation in 2024 to see how things went, to see how to pick up on all of these changes that we are both doing on our sides. Yeah. And report back to the audience and the listeners on how these bold changes came along and what were the results, right?
Yeah.
Steph, do you want to say something else to those listening? Something for the new year?
Oof, I love those moments. I gave a talk in Mexico. Right after my honeymoon, I got the opportunity to do a workshop in a university in Mexico, and I got to talk to the students, and I realized, like, I usually talked about create something today, even if it sucks, like this energy of like doing something consistently, even if it's not going to be perfect. But at that time, I felt like there's something new coming, and one of the things that popped up is this question that we often get asked very early on: who do you want to become? Who do you want to be? And it's crazy when you think about that. It's we always strive for an answer that is definitive, that is kind of like, this is the person I want to become. I want to become an astronaut, and that's kind of going to be the trajectory of my life. Like, even if you look at astronauts, like, they were astronauts for a brief season, but afterwards they become like professors, or they became consultants in all these different areas. So they never just been that. Like, even soccer players, they had a huge career, and afterwards they become broadcasters, they presenters, all the different things. And I like this thinking of like this hard question that you rarely have an answer for, and especially going into 2024, where you're like, oh, what do I want to make of this year? Like, hey, I didn't know what I was going to do in 2023 going in, and I'm still not sure what's going to happen next year. And so I feel it's okay. Like, the idea is not to have a clear destination. Like, yes, a goal is great to know kind of like what direction you want to walk in, but you don't necessarily need to have your life planned out. You don't need to know that you're going to be a lettering artist and that's going to be your thing, or a photographer. But sometimes it's just like, hey, why not try a new skill next year? Why not try this next thing that you've always been putting off and just like thinking you need that? And sometimes you have an idea of concept idea of what you want to do or need to do to get there. Like, for example, you want to become a lettering artist, like, oh, I need to study that, or I need to take these courses. Like, yes, that might help, that might actually accelerate something, but at the same time, you just need to start. And that goes back to this create something today, even if it sucks. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect, try it out. Like, I got started with the first one, and I look back on the first piece that I created, I'm like, yeah, it's not perfect. Like, there's so much that I can improve, and I draw back from a lot of skills that I've learned over the year. And so that's why I keep on growing even further. But going back to that first initial questions, who do you want to be growing up, or next year, or like for the next 10 years? Give yourself more room. You don't have to have a definitive answer right now. You can figure this out as you go, and just keep on going. Like, keep on exploring, be curious, and find out what you are interested in. And if you're listening to this podcast, this means that you're probably interested in something. And so explore that, explore different styles, explore different ideas, just so you know and you have a better idea of what you want to do. And if it's not that anymore, that's okay. Move on to the next.
Yeah, you will only find out by taking action, by getting started, right? Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Where can people find you, Leslie?
Well, currently everywhere. No, on Instagram, I'm probably most active on Instagram. If they want to email me, they can also just write me an email. They'll find that.
What's your Instagram? Is Stefan Kunz?
Yeah, STEFANKUNZ.
Perfect.
And
you have
everywhere.
your YouTube channel, right?
YouTube channel, exactly. You'll find things everywhere a little bit. I'm still reworking. Maybe next year I have time to to do some work on my website to represent more of what I'm doing right now than I used to, and it's going to be an interesting year. Yeah.
It's a process.
Exactly.
Great. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Thank you so
Martina.
much, everybody, for listening, for being in the podcast all along. And I will see you next year. We are going to get started during January. So we're going to take a small break and then come back with more interviews like this one with Stefan Kunz, and with more content and strategies and tactics for growing your practice as a lettering artist and illustrator. I am so grateful for you listening to this podcast, and I'm looking forward to spend next year, 2024, with you. Have a great new year and see you on 2024. Bye-bye. So this is it. I hope you loved this episode. You can find me, the host of the show, on social networks at Martina Flor on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. If you have a question or comments, go to martinaflor.com/podcast, where you can see previous episodes, find show notes, and send voice memos with your comments and questions. You can also watch these episodes on YouTube. Just go to martinaflor.com/YouTube to find them. You can, of course, listen to all our episodes on your favorite podcast platform. If you loved this episode, subscribe to this podcast. And if you leave us a review, it will help others find us. Thank you all for listening, and see you in the next episode of Martina Flor's Open Studio. Bye-bye.